And welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is inheritance. And we're not talking about material inheritances as much as we're talking about inheritance of belief, behavior, ways of being, patterns that we adopt from our upbringing. So it should be a really interesting conversation, hopefully. But before we get started, let's take a minute or two to get present. Let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light, lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, your molecules, your electrons, creating a brilliant beam of light and energy from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together. Vigorously rub your hands together to feel the friction, the pressure, the temperature, the sensation, the motion, the tickling and tingling when you stop, and allow all those sensations to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables you to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good morning, Rosalind. Good morning. It's so good to have you here with us this morning, and welcome to everyone else who's joining us. Great to be here with you. And today we're talking about inheritances or inheritance. And when we are young, we are taught how to think, kind of. We're taught how to be. We're taught what to believe and how to behave, how to treat ourselves and other people through the way that people treat us. And by observing the world around us, we learn how the world is. We get a perspective on what reality is. We get perspectives on what's acceptable and not acceptable behavior, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that we can view these traits as inheritances. We talk about genetic predispositions to different ailments or conditions. And this is kind of the same idea. It's not in the genes necessarily as much as it's in our field, in our beingness. And when these inheritances are invisible, we have a limited capability to transcend them because we're not aware. Once we're aware, then we have a greater responsibility and accountability to attend to these things, to actually exercise choice in the face of certain behaviors and certain patterns. So we get inheritances not just from our immediate environment, but also culturally, socially. We get what I'm calling, we can call it programming too, inheritances from media, from TV, from advertising, where we're conditioned to believe that certain things are important, or there's certain traditions that we don't even identify. So there are several examples I can give of this. One is where a client has sort of a fear around animals and certainly a distance. And after some probing, what we discovered is that their mother had had a really traumatic encounter with a dog who attacked her viciously. And so she was telling the kids as they were growing up about this vicious attack. And so what happened is the kids developed a caution at the very least, if not fear, around animals, and certainly not an ability to interact with them, to engage with them as sentient creatures. So what we were able to do is identify that, wait a second, this isn't yours. This is something that you inherited. You inherited your mom's trauma around this. And it's been a very interesting inquiry to be recognizing that this whole matrix of behaviors around animals, and this is for someone who has a deep, deep, deep love and connection to nature, which is kind of ironic and interesting, that this predisposition about how to relate to animals originated not from them, but from the trauma of a caregiver. And so once visible, then we have the beginning of access, at least, the beginning of access to choice around our behavior. And it might not be immediately available because these are patterns that we cultivate over time. And there may be other factors at play as to the matrix that's holding them in place. But it's an interesting thing. Another pattern, and this is for many males in our culture, and females, I guess, pretty much all of us, we've grown up for the most part in a very patriarchal culture here in the US. And there are many patterns that are just taken for granted, even by people who are struggling for consciousness and awareness and transformation. So the roles that we inherit, or the definition of the roles that we inherit, is something that we often don't even look at, we don't consider. And so, for example, in a traditional role, the woman does the cooking, does the cleaning, maybe does the grocery shopping, does the child rearing, in addition to a job, if they have a job, also outside the home, while the man works, maybe fixes things around the house, takes out the trash, is the breadwinner. And I know that these norms are being very much challenged now because we have multiple incomes that are needed, et cetera, et cetera. But what we're talking about is these traditional roles, oftentimes, and I've seen exceptions to any of these rules, but oftentimes the man is the one who takes care of finance, making big financial decisions, et cetera, et cetera. So many of these things are inherited that even when we try to be conscious, we may not realize it. So here was an example of an inherited kind of role behavior that had been unexamined, that was kind of shocking to my male client when we were talking about how protective he was when he was interrupted when he was in the middle of doing something, and dismissive of, like, don't bother me now, I don't have time to think about that. And the don't bother me now came up with in response to, what would you like to do for dinner? And that could mean any number of things. It could mean, do you want to go to a restaurant? Do you want to get takeout? Shall we make something? Shall I make something? Whatever. But here was a partner coming to make a connection, and they were rebuffed and essentially made less consequential, less important than whatever this person was doing. And so this was a pattern. It was a deeply entrenched pattern, and it hadn't even been visible to them as to something representative of the patriarchal culture, which they are trying to dismantle in their lives, and to create, a new sense of culture overall. And this behavior was completely invisible to them. Once made visible, it works on them a lot, because every time there's that interruption, they get reminded, oh, how can they get reminded that they have a choice. And the initial shock and shame over how dismissive their response had originally been, and how much a function of the patriarchy that they're trying to outgrow it was, the shock and shame played into the powerful awareness of choice, of being able to choose differently. But until they could see it, they couldn't really be accountable to it. Now that they see it, it's present whenever it happens. They're aware, and it raises their awareness. It brings them into greater presence. And what this person is beautifully, beautifully, beautifully introspective, and ask themselves a series of questions around this whole dynamic, which was, what is so important that I can't be interrupted? And what's the cost of that? And ultimately, where is love? Like, what's so important is I need to get things done. And why is it so important to get things done and to do more? And what is that? How is that impacting this relationship? Where's love in that interaction? And what they recognized, and this is one of the greater impacts of this whole revelation for them, what they recognized is that their value of getting stuff done, which is a very patriarchal kind of thing, we're all about doing, and the doing is more important than the being. A paradigm we're looking to shift here. But what they realized is that love is a very, very high value for them. And they were able to see this contradiction, this misalignment of values. And due to the profundity of recognizing that deep, deep misalignment, they have been very motivated to become present to the choice when it presents itself. So that's a beautiful thing. It's a really powerful, powerful experience to become aware of. Here was this inherited behavior, like that's been generational, ongoing, where what men are doing is much more important than what women are doing. What men are doing is much more important than relationship. And prioritizing work above everything else, above family, above connection. This is something that is really longstanding, and we don't necessarily recognize it. And of course, women also are playing into these roles of servitude, right? Women are in service. Women are taking care of their man, taking care of the home, taking care of the kids, taking care. And so it's a dynamic. I'm not putting blame. This isn't about blame. It's about awareness, that we get to recognize, oh, we have these patterns. We have these patterns that feed expectations, that feed into relationship and behavior. And it's all quite interesting, the dominoes that are lined up. And another part of this patriarchal expectation, inheritance, is that we're about production, efficiency, so that we can do more. It's always about more, more, more. And it's also about discipline. And just buckle down, just do it, shut up and do it, forget about your feelings. Who cares what you feel? Who cares what you want? Just do it, right? Domination, control, power, force versus flow. And I have a bunch of A-type personality clients who are very, very oriented toward this doingness that we have been indoctrinated to. And one client is, I've never seen anybody produce so many results in the world as this person. Like, they're a results making machine. And what has come up in our work together is that they had really never done much of anything that wasn't driven by obligation, commitment, or responsibility, but it was always about domination and control of self in order to discipline oneself to do all these things. And in our coaching work, I've been encouraging them to just to do what they want to do. And this is what we talk about a lot, to do what you want to do. Like, yes, there are things we have to do. And as we do what we want to do, as we give ourselves the respect, the honoring, the consideration to do what we truly desire, what lights us up, it's actually transformational. So this person took several hours to polish floors in their home. And it lights them up every time they go into the room where the polished floors are. They light up. So let's look at, was it a waste of time or self-indulgent to go polish the floor? Well, here's the thing. That, first of all, they enjoyed polishing the floor. Second of all, It's a simple, mundane thing, right? But every time they walk into that room, they feel expansive. And we talk about triggers. This person gave me a new phrase called glimmers, which is awesome. And glimmers are those things that light you up. And the more of those things that we have in our lives, you know, the like the shiny floor or the clean kitchen or the beautiful flowers or whatever it is, the more we have these things that really, truly, consistently light us up, our frequency is elevated. And as our frequency is elevated, then we radiate that higher frequency. And this person expressed that they are much better able now to they do stuff that needs to be done without the resistance, without the complaint, without belaboring it. It just becomes a whole lot easier. And so again, this is inheritance, in that we have this notion that we have to buckle down, put our nose to the grindstone, pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. We have all these expressions for what it is to overpower ourselves, to dominate ourselves, rather than to listen to what is it that's really calling from my heart? What is it that I really want to do? Because, and this is a new way of thinking, it's kind of dissolving some of those social inheritances, that as we do more of what we want to do, we're coming into fuller expression of our authentic selves. And through that fuller expression of our authenticity, we find greater fulfillment and we fulfill what we came here to do even more fully. So until we recognize these unconscious patterns, we don't really have power or responsibility in addressing them. And so paying attention to our inheritances, you can sort of see generational patterns. So, for instance, in my family, there was a generational pattern of anger. And recognizing that that was an inheritance, gave me some power in addressing it. Like, just because we inherit it doesn't mean that it has to remain operative for us. And even in a genetic predisposition notion, if you're familiar, if you've ever heard of epigenetics, it lets us know that we may have a predisposition to something, but it doesn't mean that we're doomed to that or that we're destined to that, that we can change behaviors, we can change our patterns in such a way that the predisposition is interrupted and redirected. So, in other words, a genetically inherited trait is not necessarily a condemnation, is not necessarily a sentence that's put upon us. That we actually have the ability, by changing lifestyle, by changing our behavioral patterns, our emotional patterns, we can affect change in our bodies and being. So there are some inheritances that carry a tremendous burden that are better left behind, that we can actually free ourselves from the shackles of habitual or habituated behaviors. So this is a great story. It's funny because it had been told me as a personal thing, and apparently it's more kind of folklore. But there was a mother who every time she made pot roast or whatever, she'd cut off the end of the pot roast, put it in the oven and cook it. And the child asked, "Why do you cut off the end of the pot roast?" And the mother says, "Well, that's what I was taught to do." And so the mom got curious and went to her mom and said, "Hey, what's with the cutting off the end of the pot roast?" And the mother said, "I had to cut off the end of the pot roast so it would fit in the pan." But we inherit these things. Obviously, then the mom didn't have to cut off the end of the pot roast anymore. But until we are aware, we just habituate into different patterns and behaviors. So Rosalind says, noticing habits, attachments, identification. Take away those things, and does the person have emergent properties? I don't think it's possible to separate inherited properties. Well, I think that we do as we dissolve or transform or transmute these inheritances, which I do believe is possible. I've seen it in myself. I've seen it in people I work with, that I do see emergent properties, emergent capabilities, emergent capacities, where, so I have another client who has, there's a family pattern of anxiety, and this person is breaking that mold. And they have lived with this for more than 60 years. And they are breaking the mold, which is pretty remarkable. It's pretty extraordinary. But, and the emergent properties, maybe they were just buried properties or emergent, buried capabilities. I mean, if we're anxious all the time, makes it hard to experience joy, but what's emerging is joy. So I kind of think of us as whatever this essence is, with all kinds of overlays of beliefs and patterns and behaviors and whatever conditioning. And as we peel those away, it's like there's a more permeable membrane, there's a more room to breathe, there's greater potential for expansiveness and possibility. So I think it's an interesting thing to think about these things as inheritances, and to recognize that just because we've inherited certain furniture doesn't mean we have to keep it forever, right? Maybe we've inherited certain things from generations past. It doesn't mean we have to keep those things. We get to relieve ourselves. So that's it for today. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I go live here each weekday morning on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel at 9 a.m. Eastern. And I invite you to check out the other awesome programming on Enlightened World Network and Enlightened World Living. And as always, it is my pleasure and privilege to spend this time with you and to be exploring different ways of being, of thinking, of relating to the world. And so until next time. So